I really liked the first Wonder Woman movie when it came out, and I was looking so forward to seeing what Patty Jenkins would do with the sequel. And now that the sequel is out, it's time to compare it to the first movie and see which one is superior. Let the battle commence. The story for Wonder Woman opens in a place called Themyscira, where we are introduced to a young girl called Diana who we see grow up into adulthood. One day after training, she sees a man drowning in the ocean. She goes to rescue the pilot, not knowing the Germans are on his trail. After the Amazons battle them off, they question Steve Trevor, and he reveals that he has stolen the evil Dr. Poison's notebook that contains her research for her toxic gas. And if he delivers it to the British intelligence, then the war will be over. After he describes the war, Diana believes that it is being instigated by Ares, and if she kills him, then she can rid the world of all evil. She makes a deal with Steve Trevor that if she gets him off the island, then he will take her to Ares. He agrees, and from here, the two characters embark on a journey to stop the war. And as she gets nearer to her goals, she realizes that the situation is not as black and white as she thought. Now, the plot for the first Wonder Woman is nice, simple, to the point, and leaves a ton of room for character development between Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor, as well as the rest of the team. And the story for Wonder Woman 1984 is that there apparently is this magic rock that was forged by Zeus, and somehow this thing is so easy to find that it ends up in the hands of a museum, and it's never explained, but somehow our villain of the movie, Maxwell Lord, knows everything about the stone and he is looking for it. But before he gets his hands on it, it falls into the hands of Barbara, who uses it and wishes to be just like Diana for some reason. Then Diana gets a hold of it and uses it to wish for Steve Trevor to come back, and then Maxwell Lord gets it and uses it to become the most successful businessman in the world, as well as crush his competitors. Meanwhile, Wonder Woman spends a lot of time with Steve Trevor. We see Barbara slowly discover her powers and become more confident, and then about an hour and 5 minutes into the movie, Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor try to put a stop to Maxwell Lord's evil schemes. As you could probably tell, the story for the first Wonder Woman is nice and simple, giving both of our characters a clear journey that is full of character development and hard lessons that will change our main character as the film goes on. But Wonder Woman 1984 abandons that simplicity with the storytelling and instead decides to cram so much stuff into the story at once. And on top of that, it makes several changes to what it has already established in the first movie. The first thing that it makes significant changes to is the tone. The tone for the majority of this movie was very cartoony. The same goes for the way that the actors were directed with their performances, and whereas the tone struck a balance and worked very well for the first film, it just felt all over the place in Wonder Woman 1984. And the motivation to give it the more goofy tone is because the movie is trying very hard to adapt the tone of Richard Donner's Superman. But the first Wonder Woman already had the tone of Richard Donner's Superman, both with its tone and several of its scenes paying homage to it. But one thing it always maintained was the seriousness of the threat. Very early on in the film, we see Wonder Woman's home invaded with several of her people dying, and the threat is established. Even when the action did get kind of fun and lighthearted, it first built up this growing sense of danger, which was reduced when Wonder Woman swings into action, but after the fun and lightheartedness was over, the feeling of danger was still there. It didn't have Wonder Woman winking at the camera and having little girls smiling. That is the complete opposite of building up a dangerous atmosphere, and as a result, the feeling of danger is just not there, and you're watching an action scene that has no bearing on the rest of the story. Basically, you are watching an exact copy of Wonder Woman's opening scene in Joss Whedon's Justice League, a scene that doesn't establish anything for the rest of the movie and has no bearing on the plot, but is just used to make the character look good. The same goes for the opening scene in Themyscira, but we'll get to that later. Bottom line, Wonder Woman was not established as something goofy. It was established as something serious with elements of lightheartedness. And to go from lightheartedness to full-on 110% goofy, you can't do that. You need to maintain a level of consistency with regards to tone. Otherwise, you go from the darker tone of Batman Returns to the lighter tone of Batman Forever. And as for the pacing of the story in Wonder Woman 1984, it feels like it's skipping through plot points and character development so quickly. And on top of that, the movie's editing and pacing felt very out of control. The movie constantly cuts back and forth to Diana, Barbara, and Maxwell Lord, and every time it cuts to them, plot points are being established, and instead of developing them, the movie just cuts straight to the next character and their next plot line. Either that, or it will keep cutting to our characters taking up precious screen time that does nothing to advance the characters, or the plot for that matter. And then it will make its way back to Wonder Woman, and rather than expanding on what we saw with her earlier, it will just bring up the next random thing. And rather than expand on that, it will just cut back to Barbara and establish something new with her. And then it will quickly cut to Maxwell Lord and establish something new with him. And then it will make its way back to Wonder Woman and do the exact same thing again. You see what I mean? The pacing is out of control as it just never stops and properly develops the material that is being given to us. Half the time, the stuff it shows isn't even relevant to the story, and this especially acts as a detriment to the relationship between Cheetah and Wonder Woman, as the development and relationship the two characters have is very sloppily thrown together, and it fails to establish a connection between the hero and the eventual villain. And this is also the case for Wonder Woman and Maxwell Lord with the silly wishing stone, but we'll talk more about the villains later. In the first Wonder Woman, the story and its unraveling of character and plot is very precise, and that makes for a very well constructed pace and structure to the overall story. In Wonder Woman 1984, however, a ton of random stuff happens, plot points are unstrategically thrown in with none of them being given enough time to be developed, and most of them have absolutely nothing to do with the actual story that's going on. The first film told a story coherently, gave each plot point plenty of time to be developed, and above all, made sense. Wonder Woman 1984's story fails at all of those things, so the movie with the superior story is the first Wonder Woman. Now, both movies have an opening scene where we see a young Diana in Themyscira, and the inclusion of this makes sense because we see her grow as a character, and this ultimately ties into her adult life, which then ties into the main story when Steve Trevor arrives on the island. In Wonder Woman 1984, we also open on Themyscira, and I'm just gonna say it, this scene was completely pointless. Really, if you take this scene out of the movie, it would make no difference to the rest of the film. It was only here to establish the gold armor costume, as well as give Diana some words of wisdom by her mother. And if this was a super short scene, it wouldn't be much of a problem, but it goes on for 11 minutes. That is too long, especially for a scene that doesn't logically connect to anything. And also, why is she competing with grown women as opposed to little girls her age? Now, in the first movie, Wonder Woman is a fish out of water. She is shown to be a nice and caring person who wants to put a stop to all the evil in the world, and in order to accomplish this, she feels that she must kill the god of war Ares to do it. And as the movie goes on, you see her react to all the death and bloodshed that is going on as both her, Steve Trevor, and his crew navigate through the war. Now, in Wonder Woman 1984, Diana is just living life while saving people here and there, and honestly, she isn't doing anything that could be considered film-worthy. She is just living her life as she normally would off camera. That is, until she meets Steve Trevor. Now, Steve Trevor comes back, only he doesn't come back as himself. His spirit comes back and possesses a man who now has no control over his body. And the two are sleeping in his home, eating his food, going through his clothes, and in his comatose state, this guy can't do a single thing about it. And Wonder Woman gives no thought to this. She's supposed to be a superhero. She's supposed to know that this is not right. She should talk to Steve and tell him things that she always wanted to tell him, but then she should try to rescue this poor man whose family is probably worried sick and looking for him. But they don't even give this guy a second's thought. Instead, she dresses him up, they go on these death-defying missions that could completely destroy his body, and to top off the abuse to this innocent man, she makes out and even has sex with his body. That is not heroic. That is the very definition of rape. You're not a superhero anymore, you're a rapist.
Rape? What? Rape. That's a rape. This is what raping is. You're a raper and you raped me. That's a rape! Rape!
This also shows Wonder Woman in a very hypocritical light. There is a scene where Maxwell Lord is flirting with Barbara, and Barbara is really enjoying it because she likes Max Lord. So clearly, consent has been given and the flirting is going back and forth. Yet Diana shows up and through body language is essentially telling him, "That's enough. Stop flirting with her. This is inappropriate. You can leave now." So she has a problem with the back and forth flirting even though consent is given, but she has no problem with sleeping with a man that has no control over his own body where no consent is given.
Great, so thank you so much for coming.
Honestly, what is wrong with her? I mean, seriously, imagine if the roles were reversed. It would cause an outcry of controversy. This whole thing really does bother and disturb me, and it pretty much throws out any opportunity for Wonder Woman to give a lesson on morality for the rest of the film, as she does something that is just plain criminal. All they should have done to fix this was just say that Steve Trevor came back in his own body, and they would have avoided all of this rapey nonsense. I mean, why didn't The Rock just bring back Steve Trevor in his own body? Does this magic rock have a twisted sense of humor or something?
I wish I was a big star!
I can make you the biggest star of all, but the bigger they get, the harder they fall!
Wait a minute! That's not what I meant by becoming a star! You big stupid...
Something I very quickly realized is that if you like any of these characters in Wonder Woman 1984, then that isn't because this movie has done a good job of making you like them. The only reason you like them is because the first movie did a great job at making you like them. If you skipped the first film and this was your first introduction to these characters, you wouldn't even be that crazy about them. There are also emotional scenes that I wanted to be invested in, but because the movie has done such a terrible job at telling the story and portraying these characters, when these scenes finally happened, I just didn't care. And that's really bad because I liked Diana and Steve Trevor in the first movie, and I cared when he died and the two were separated, but I didn't feel anything when he left in this one. Come to think of it, I didn't feel anything when he came back in the film either. I was just confused, and losing a chunk of her powers for wishing Steve Trevor back was a great idea for her to struggle with in concept, but the movie hardly delves into it, so it just ends up being a wasted opportunity. So this movie has through and through done a terrible job at emotionally attaching me to the characters and even the story. Wonder Woman as a character went through a very good amount of growth in the first movie, and when you look at the beginning and end of the film, you have a character that has matured and changed. In Wonder Woman 1984, you don't get a character that has changed. She is exactly the same at the end of the movie as she is at the beginning. Well, aside from becoming a hypocrite and a rapist, those are the only new things that she learned. And by the end of the movie, you just look at her in more of a negative light, and that is a massive shame. So the movie with the superior representation of Wonder Woman, as well as the superior side characters, is the first movie. Now, Dr. Poison and Ludendorff in the first movie do a decent job as the film's villains, and then we of course get Ares, who honestly felt tacked on at the last minute. And although I like the idea that he whispers horrendous acts into people's ears, almost like a devil whisperer, his inclusion kind of goes against the hard lesson that Wonder Woman learns about evil living inside of human beings and not being caused by one outside source. So the villains in the first Wonder Woman movie are passable and get the job done, but they aren't great, especially Ares and his horrendous design. Now in Wonder Woman 1984, we get two villains. We get Maxwell Lord and Cheetah. Now Cheetah starts off as a nerd that no one pays any attention to, and after only 2 small visits with Diana, Barbara eventually gets hold of the magic rock and wishes, "I want to be like Diana." And I'm here like, why? You literally just met her. Why do you suddenly want to be like her? It makes no sense. You also don't even understand where this obsession comes from. In Batman Forever, you can see the obsession that Edward Nygma has with Bruce Wayne. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, you can see the obsession that Max Dillon has with Spider-Man. Even in Iron Man 3, you can see the obsession that the Mandarin has with Tony Stark. But in Wonder Woman 1984, for the life of me, I don't understand where this obsession that Barbara has with Diana comes from. And when she finds out that Diana is Wonder Woman, she doesn't even react to it. The other movies I just mentioned are not considered good comic book movies, but even they, convincingly enough, manage to establish this obsession with the heroes that starts out being an obsession of admiration, but turns into a sick and disturbed obsession of madness. And that is a very important foundation that you must establish in order to make the villain's grudge and our hero work for the rest of the movie. But Cheetah does not have that foundation set up, and as a result, the relationship that these two have throughout the movie is just not convincing in the slightest. But forget about that. I think the biggest question is, why on earth would you want to adapt this old and dated storyline for a villain? The storyline where the villain starts out as a geeky, nerdy, and unpopular person who goes crazy and becomes evil. I honestly think that unless you can have a smart, new spin on the idea, you should just never do this kind of villainous origin story. And I genuinely think that out of all the comic book villains that have had this plot point, Wonder Woman 1984 does it the worst out of all of them. And believe it or not, but Cheetah's arc gets worse. 2 hours into the movie, she's like, I want to be different from everyone else. I want to be number one. Like an apex predator. And I'm just thinking, where the hell is this coming from? It's obvious that they are trying to make her become Cheetah now, but at no point did the character ever have a fascination with apex predators. At no point did she hate the new person that she had become. She just didn't want Wonder Woman to deprive her of her first wish. And to all of a sudden want to be transformed into a cheetah, it's like, what? This doesn't make any sense. It's like they just wanted Wonder Woman to have a fight at the end of the movie, so they forced one in literally at the last minute. And the fight itself wasn't even that special. Plus, she is only Cheetah for one scene in the movie. You can't do that. No one in their right mind would make a creative choice like this. and Cheetah is Wonder Woman's most recognizable villain, and this is what you do to her. Even her origin in this movie was absolutely one of the worst origin stories I have ever seen. And right from the beginning, they don't do her origin justice, as when she first meets Diana, she asks if they could have lunch, but Diana turns her down like she can't be bothered. This is a good starting point to establish the eventual hate that Barbara has for Diana, but they immediately invalidate this scene and destroy that foundation by having Diana meet her for a few seconds later at her job, and then for lunch just a mere few minutes after she turned her down. So right from the beginning, Cheetah's whole origin story was flawed, and they continued to build her character on top of an unstable foundation. It was just a matter of time before it came tumbling down. Then we have Maxwell Lord. Now the first time we see him, he somehow already knows about this magic rock. We don't know how he knows about it, just that he knows about its magical powers and tries to get it. That's it. Now I did like how he took advantage of the wishes. When people usually have the ability to make magic wishes in movies, they usually wish for stupid stuff and don't think long term. But Maxwell Lord does think long term, and the wishes that he makes, especially his first one, I thought was very smart. He essentially makes a wish to where he can have all the wishes he wants. That's what I always thought that people should do in movies when they have wishes like this, and he makes them, and because of his well-chosen wishes, he becomes super powerful. I also like how each time the citizens start making wishes, they start tearing the world apart and screwing things up, and from there, things get rapidly worse and everything just turns into absolute chaos. That was fun, and it was also funny in a dark way. The problem with wishes in a movie though is that it creates the plot hole of, well, if the villain wanted to win, then all he had to do was wish that everything would go his way, and then that's it, world domination would be his in a minute. And by including the magic wish-giving rock, this movie creates so many huge plot holes for itself. And a wishing rock is so lazy from a writing perspective. It's like they didn't want to write how this businessman became all powerful, because that's too much work to set up and develop. So how about we skip all of that and just give him wishes that can make him a powerful businessman after one sentence. There, done. It's just lazy, and aside from the somewhat interesting subplot with his son, as a villain, he didn't stand a chance. He was always going to be a terrible villain right from the beginning. So even though the villains in the first Wonder Woman are just okay, they are far better than the villains in Wonder Woman 1984. And seriously, when the nerdy villain has a fashion change, it is supposed to happen off-screen, but for some reason they decided to show it to you in great detail here. It's no wonder this movie is 2.5 hours. So the movie with the superior villains is the first Wonder Woman.
Those are cool. I like those. The animal print.
So that's where her fascination with apex predators came from. I guess it all makes sense now. Now, I never thought that the action in the first Wonder Woman was great. I thought it was good, but could definitely be improved. But the action in Wonder Woman 1984, it's not great, it's not even good. It is mediocre at best. The very first action scene is a big mess with regards to the new campy tone that it just suddenly decides to throw at us, and it's just so silly and full of itself. And the later action scenes, such as the chase scene, conceptually there are some good ideas going on here, but the way it's edited and the way it's filmed, it's not exciting. It wasn't even cinematic. It looked unfinished, and I was constantly thinking to myself, you could have made this look so cool if you shot it differently and more creatively, but you decided to go the less creative and honestly the more lazy route, and the action suffers as a result. And Patty Jenkins' choice to ditch Wonder Woman's shield and sword was a big mistake. In the first movie, there was so much variety in the way Wonder Woman would fight. She would use her super strength, she would use her shield to defend herself as well as attack, and she would also use her sword and the lasso. There was just so much variety to the way she would fight. But in Wonder Woman 1984, they removed the shield and sword, and Wonder Woman just had her lasso. That's it. And I thought that the lasso was so overused in this film to the point that I honestly didn't want to see that thing again. And I loved its utility in the first film. It could do some simple and more advanced tricks for combat, and it functioned as a way for Wonder Woman to maneuver around her environment. The rules for this thing were very simple, and the movie made very ample use of it. But here, the damn thing didn't make any sense. She was maneuvering around her environment in ways that defied the physics that the first film established. The lasso of truth can now give people vision somehow. She can now lasso the wind, and she also used it in the end as a means to speak to the whole world by tying it around Maxwell Lord's leg, even though he kept blowing her lasso away. I've been going over this in my mind so much, and I even made stuff up in defense of this movie, and I still don't know how she managed to use it to communicate with people around the world. And the final battle with Cheetah All I can remember with this scene is that there is a lot of jumping, diving, and floating. An action scene with Wonder Woman and Cheetah is meant to have a lot of hand-to-hand combat involved, and we got none of that here. Wonder Woman's armor, which was also built up to be so great, both in the marketing and the movie, just starts breaking down like it's nothing, and the action scene felt like it had no relevance and no stakes, and the rivalry wasn't built up and was nowhere to be found during this battle. And in general, it feels like the final action scene in the first Wonder Woman between her and Ares was split into two in Wonder Woman 1984. The action part was done with Cheetah, and the motivational speech that Wonder Woman gives while the villain yells at her is with Max Lord. So the climax is exactly the same as the first movie, and although Patty Jenkins said that in the first film the studio told her to do it, in the second movie, whether she realizes it or not, she recreated the exact same climax on her own accord. I genuinely think that action is not Patty Jenkins' strong suit as a director, which really worries me for her upcoming Star Wars project. In the first Wonder Woman, the action scenes were good enough and provided the movie with enough variety, which helped its pacing and also enhanced the story and character development. But in Wonder Woman 1984, the action scenes are here, but they are poorly handled and don't feel necessary. And this gives the whole movie in general a lack of stakes and purpose. Also, this movie cost $200 million to make. That is $40 million more than Aquaman. Can you see where the money went? Because I certainly can't. So the movie with the far superior action is the first Wonder Woman. The first Wonder Woman was a simple movie with some commentary about the dark side of humanity to elevate the material. Its sequel, however, gives you so much information to take in, but none of it is deep. It's just nonsensical, doesn't make sense, and in all honesty, is so full of itself. It's like the success of the first Wonder Woman got to Patty Jenkins and Gal Gadot's head that they thought anything they preach would be inspiring to all of the world. This is most likely why Gal Gadot decided to sing that song to uplift the less fortunate during the early stages of the pandemic. And that final speech from Wonder Woman, bullshit. You cannot possibly get everyone to resend their wish through a speech about the truth. Look at the world we live in. Speaking the truth in this day and age is considered controversial and will get you cancelled. And you're telling me that everyone on the face of the earth that made these wishes bought this speech? Bullshit. That is my only response to this resolution. And other stuff they threw in, like the invisible jet, Diana says she only turned a cup invisible 50 years ago. And now she tries, and with ease, is able to turn this whole freaking jet invisible. I mean, even Violet from The Incredibles used her force field powers way more than once. Even she had trouble creating a force field that was big enough to cover a plane. You see, when a 16-year-old superhero cartoon is more realistic than a frickin' movie, then you know that you screwed up. There are even missed opportunities for character development. For example, there could have been an emotional moment where Steve could have asked Diana about his friends from the first movie and what happened to them after that battle, but he doesn't. It's like he doesn't even care. He had to leave a lot behind, but he doesn't try to revisit any of it, because, like I said, the movie feels like it's in a rush to quickly move on to the next scene with the other characters. There's just no breathing room in this film, and that really bothered me. Even Warner Brothers were concerned about the cartoonish tone, as well as the 2 opening scenes that Wonder Woman got, as well as several of the other choices that Patty Jenkins made, and she told them to trust her. And because she did a great job directing the first Wonder Woman, they gave her leeway and creative freedom, and it turns out that the studio was actually right in their concerns, and that she was wrong. It's time for the scores. I still really like the first Wonder Woman movie, and it turns out that we should have given a lot of the credit for this film to the writers, because Patty Jenkins didn't bring them back for Wonder Woman 2, and their absence is really felt here. Wonder Woman 1 gets a 7 out of 10, and Wonder Woman 1984 gets a 3. There was very little that I liked about this movie. After I finished watching it, I got more and more disappointed the more I thought about it. I waited so long to see it, then it got delayed, and then the pandemic made us wait even longer, and now we finally get it, and it wasn't even worth it. I've been praising Patty Jenkins as a director for so long now, and my faith in her as a director has been shaken, as she was given full creative control over this movie, and she even played a part in writing it, and this is what she comes out with. It doesn't even feel like the same director that made the first Wonder Woman made the sequel, and the reason why is because the first Wonder Woman was written by 3 men, including one of the guys who writes comics for Wonder Woman. Patty Jenkins did not have anything to do with the script for the first movie, and clearly, that's why it was well written. The first movie showcased female empowerment in a way which was not preachy or heavy-handed. It was done in a very mature manner, and I expected the same from Wonder Woman 2. But no, instead, every man in this movie, aside from Steve Trevor and a homeless dude, is a perverted creep. And I don't understand why Wonder Woman 1984 did this, especially when the first movie was praised for not doing it. That's one of the things that people loved about the first Wonder Woman, and it's something they appreciated even more as time went on. It wasn't doing what Captain Marvel did, it wasn't doing what Ghostbusters did, it wasn't doing what Birds of Prey did. It was tackling the men and women conversation in a way which was very mature and did not feel heavy-handed, and it all serviced the story in the end. But as soon as Patty Jenkins started writing for it, she showed that she is no different from the writers of those other preachy female-led movies out there. And as a direct result, Wonder Woman 1984 just took a huge step back and sunk to those films' level. And that is a huge stain on this movie that will never come off. And the damage that this movie has done to Wonder Woman as a character, well, it's made me lose interest in seeing a Wonder Woman 3, that's for sure. But unfortunately, it has already been confirmed that Patty Jenkins is coming back to direct and write the next movie. And that does not fill me with confidence. They really need to bring back the writers of the first film. That is the only way that I will be interested in seeing another Wonder Woman movie. So, that's it for another Versus video. Trust me, there was so much more bad stuff I could talk about with Wonder Woman 1984, but if I did that, the video would be about as long as the actual movie. I have plenty more Versus videos on the way, including a Versus video on the horror film Wrong Turn, which got a remake recently, as well as a Versus video with the Snyder Cut when that releases later this month. And I will also be reviewing the final 2 episodes of WandaVision as well, and giving my concluding thoughts on that show. So, stay tuned, as there is a lot of great stuff coming to the channel. Thanks as always for watching, guys. Please do click that thumbs up button if you like the video, as it really does help, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell right next to it if you haven't already, so you can stay up to date with all of my future reviews. And I will see all of you next time. Take care.